What does it take for a film shoot to become the worst in Hollywood history? A massive storm wiping out every set? That's happened before. Endless delays? Practically routine. An actor suffers a heart attack on camera? Rare, but it's happened too. Now, what if you add another actor who filmed most of his scenes drunk? A director who put his house on the line just to keep production alive? Plus illnesses, fires, and even a real war, with helicopters and all, erupting at the exact time and place where the movie was shot? In that case, we'd only be scratching the surface of the chaotic production that was Apocalypse Now. For those who haven't seen it, Apocalypse Now wasn't just one of Francis Ford Coppola's most iconic works, it was one of the defining war films of the 1970s. Filmed in 1976 and released in 1979, it was a loose adaptation of Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness. The story follows Captain Willard, a soldier sent deep into the Cambodian jungle on a mission to find and eliminate Colonel Kurtz, a once respected officer who had lost his mind and built his own rogue army. What begins as a military assignment soon turns into a descent into madness, an exploration of war as collective delirium. The film became a landmark of cinema, redefined the war genre, and left a lasting mark on Coppola's career. But beyond all that, Apocalypse Now was a curse. And in this video, we'll go through step by step all the things that turned this shoot into a true nightmare. Because if there's a checklist for everything that can possibly go wrong, this movie checks every box. Let's dive in. It all began with an adaptation, Heart of Darkness, Joseph Conrad's novel, reimagined as a war story set during Vietnam. The script was written by the legendary John Milius and spent years drifting across Hollywood desks. The first director interested was George Lucas, who planned to shoot it guerrilla style, on a tiny budget and right in the middle of the war, a plan that was dismissed as pure madness. Lucas then shifted his focus to Star Wars. Then Francis Ford Coppola stepped in. Fresh off The Godfather Part 2 and The Conversation, he was at the peak of his career. Confident and ambitious, Coppola decided to produce the film himself and put up his own money. The location chosen was the Philippines, with landscapes that resembled Vietnam and a government under Ferdinand Marcos willing to loan military helicopters and, even more unbelievable, real napalm. If that's how things started, you can imagine what the first day looked like. The jungle was nearly impossible to navigate. Crew members were getting sick, supplies ran out quickly, and then a local armed conflict broke out, forcing the army to recall the very helicopters they had lent to the production so they could crush a rebel uprising. All of this happened on day one, and to make matters worse, the helicopters were repainted to look like U.S. Army aircraft. This meant that every time the Filipino military needed them back, the art department had to strip the paint and restore them for combat, then repaint them again for filming. It was a logistical nightmare that kept the art crew working endless hours in the open jungle, surrounded by insects, disease, and buckets of paint. And of course, those helicopters weren't free. Every week, generals showed up on set with their entourages, halting production and demanding to see scenes. Officially, it was for security, but on set, everyone knew the generals just wanted to show off in front of their guests. The interruptions caused even more delays, but the worst was still to come. When the crew finally cut a path into the dense jungle, they built camp areas to make the shoot survivable. But just as the work was done, a Category 4 storm slammed the site head-on, with winds over 120 miles per hour. It leveled the sets, toppled light towers, destroyed equipment, and left the location in worse condition than when they'd first arrived. Weeks of construction were wiped out in a single night. The storm was so violent that it triggered emergency weather reports. In Manila, the capital, there were blackouts, fallen trees, and entire neighborhoods underwater. Out in the jungle, there was no communication, no backup, no plan B, just mud, wreckage, and a stunned crew. You might be wondering if anyone died in all this chaos. Luckily not yet, because like I said, the shoot was only just beginning. Production shut down for 2 months. The assistant director barely survived the stress, not realizing this was just 1/6 of the forthcoming delays. For weeks, many believed the project would be canceled, but Coppola was already consumed by obsession. And while that storm may have felt like the first nail in the coffin, it wasn't enough to stop either the director or his wallet. The casting for this movie turned out to be as disastrous as the storm, the war, and the unforgiving jungle combined. By the time filming was already underway, Francis Ford Coppola still had not secured a lead actor. Steve McQueen, Robert Redford, Al Pacino, Jack Nicholson, and James Caan were all approached, but each refused. The idea of being stuck for months in the Philippine jungle drove them away. Running out of options, Coppola cast Harvey Keitel as Captain Willard, but within a month he let him go. Coppola didn't believe his performance. Willard had to be a man broken from within, and Keitel still looked far too composed. That's when Martin Sheen stepped in, and Martin Sheen was broken for real. He often arrived on set, crushed by stress, alcohol, and the weight of the role. The opening scene where Willard smashes a mirror and cuts his hand wasn't staged. Sheen was drunk, out of control, and Coppola chose not to stop the cameras. In that moment, Sheen fully tapped into Willard's despair. He gave himself over to the character's anguish, and Coppola, instead of pulling him back, pushed him deeper. That was the point where fiction began to merge with reality. But taking a role that far comes at a cost, and here, it nearly proved fatal. No exaggeration, during one scene, Sheen suffered a real heart attack in the middle of the jungle. The cameras caught it all. At only 36 years old, he collapsed mid-shoot, worn down by psychological strain, heat, and humidity. He was rushed out by helicopter while the crew scrambled to hide the incident from the press, terrified it would confirm just how unstable the project had become.
All of the crew, everybody, was making phone calls to LA saying, oh, we don't know what's happening with the film, they're going to stop, Marty's had a heart attack, but others were saying Marty is dead.
Sheen survived, but he was forced to step away for days. Coppola, convinced he was already too deep into the chaos, decided the only option was to press on. He believed he was making a movie that might destroy his career and kill his lead actor in the process. And if that sounds extreme, remember, this was only halfway through the nightmare. While Sheen was still struggling to return to the set, Marlon Brando finally showed up. And here we need to pause, because Brando's behavior alone could have been its own story. He was the most famous actor in the cast, a legend. Coppola was so convinced Brando would save the film that he went into debt just to secure him. But despite being paid $3 million, around $17 million today, Brando stepped off his private plane, bald, nearly 90 pounds overweight, and without having read a single page of the script. He refused to memorize lines and demanded to improvise all his dialogue, so the crew fitted him with a hidden earpiece to feed him instructions. To disguise his appearance, which looked nothing like what Coppola had envisioned, they filmed him mostly in shadows or partially hidden. People love to say Ed Wood was a hack for hiding Bela Lugosi's double behind a cape, but Coppola ended up using a slightly more polished version of the same trick. Brando even insisted his character be called Colonel Laley. Several scenes were filmed with that name, only to be scrapped later. And since he still refused to read the script, Coppola gave in, rewriting much of the third act directly on set to fit whatever Brando improvised at the time. Then, as if that weren't enough, Brando one day simply decided he was done. He still had scenes left to shoot, but in his mind, his work was finished. He walked away and wasn't seen again until the premiere. If Sheen and Brando weren't enough, Dennis Hopper pushed things into full-blown chaos. Hopper was notorious for his unstable lifestyle, and his conditions for appearing in Apocalypse Now were unconventional. To put it mildly, if you want details, you'll have to look them up yourself. We'd rather not risk getting this video demonetized. On top of that, Hopper and Brando despised each other. They couldn't even share the same set, so every scene involving both actors had to be filmed on separate days. And it wasn't just the leads driving the madness. The atmosphere around the production spiraled out of control. The hotel parties became legendary for their excess and lack of restraint. Many actors and extras spent the shoot in a near-constant altered state, making every interaction unpredictable. One surfer, cast as a soldier in Robert Duvall's battalion, was reportedly never seen calm or sober during the entire production. Working with this cast was often impossible. As Eleanor Coppola, Francis's wife and the filmmaker behind Hearts of Darkness, later recalled, "We knew everything could explode at any moment, and yet somehow they kept shooting." Coppola wasn't just directing a film, he was fighting a war. And like any war, the chaos wasn't only external, it was internal as well. During the shoot, he suffered panic attacks, fits of uncontrollable anger, and moments of absolute despair. In one outburst, he threw his 5 Oscars out the window. He thought constantly about quitting, and became convinced he was making a film that was incoherent, endless, and doomed to fail. At one point, he carried 4 different endings in his head, all the way into post-production. Years later, he admitted, "We didn't know if Kurtz should die, if Willard should join him, or if it was all a dream. We just kept filming, waiting for the story to tell us. My film isn't about Vietnam. It is Vietnam. The crew worked under constant uncertainty. Many days began without anyone knowing what scene would be shot. In the middle of that chaos, Coppola leaned on one of his guiding principles. I don't make the actor play the character. I make the character play the actor. That meant pushing everyone, himself included, to their physical and emotional breaking point, especially after what happened with Martin Sheen. Coppola no longer knew where fiction ended and reality began, and neither did his lead actor. After his heart attack, Sheen not only had to recover physically, but also fell into a deep spiritual crisis. He broke down emotionally, convinced he would die in that jungle. It wasn't a fleeting thought. The role was consuming him from within. This terrified Coppola, who began to fear Sheen might actually harm himself, that the film was driving him past the point of no return. The line between acting and reality had completely collapsed. Coppola wasn't directing characters driven mad by war. They were losing their minds while making the film. And then came the financial pressure. Independent financing, built on pre-sales and Coppola's personal debt, was becoming impossible to sustain. Every week of delay meant hundreds of thousands more in costs. Producers were demanding results, the crew was exhausted, and the jungle was merciless. In the middle of it all, Coppola made the desperate choice we mentioned earlier. He put up his own house as collateral to keep the film alive, gambling everything he had on a production that seemed like it might never end. In pursuit of absolute authenticity, the production spiraled into excesses and bizarre incidents that bordered on the absurd. On the set of Kurtz's compound, for example, a water buffalo was shown split in half. It wasn't a replica or a prop. It was a real animal sacrificed for the scene. But the obsession with realism went even further. For one macabre sequence, hanging corpses were used, and they weren't mannequins. Rumor had it that a local supplier had delivered actual human bodies stolen from a nearby cemetery. The smell was unbearable, and police had to intervene, confiscate the remains, and arrest several crew members. The chaos also spilled over beyond the cameras. At one point, a tiger needed to be transported to the set. Since its cage was too large to fit in the plane, the crew improvised a makeshift enclosure inside the cabin, without sedating the animal. When the tiger broke loose mid-flight, the terrified pilot climbed out through the window and refused to return until it was restrained. Only then did he agree to take off. And if all that weren't enough, the deadliest enemy of any production was still waiting: fire. Coppola, obsessed with realism, not only demanded the use of actual napalm, but also insisted the explosions be massive, authentic, and apocalyptic. The problem, though no one on set seemed willing to say it, was obvious. A dense jungle filled with dry vegetation is the worst place to set off real fire. During one sequence, a sudden change in wind turned what was meant to be a breathtaking shot into a wildfire. The flames spread faster than anyone could react. Warehouses, equipment, entire structures, and worst of all, several reels of film were destroyed. Production shut down. Again. Everything had to be rebuilt. Again. And the crew had to wait until the jungle itself allowed them to keep going. By that point, Apocalypse Now was no longer a movie. It was a nightmare unfolding in real time. Everything burned: the sets, the nerves, the scripts, the bodies. And yet, somehow, the madness finally ended in May 1977. Coppola arrived at the Cannes Film Festival with a cut that was still unfinished, no final sound mix, and entire sections being adjusted right up to the last minute. He even carried several film cans with alternate versions. He presented it raw, incomplete, imperfect, and yet it received a standing ovation. The film went on to win the Palme d'Or and earn 8 Academy Award nominations. It became a landmark in cinema, redefining the war genre with a poetic, hallucinatory, and ferocious vision of conflict and madness, almost as if the chaos of the production itself had become a reflection of the story it was trying to tell. The documentary Hearts of Darkness, A Filmmaker's Apocalypse, directed by Eleanor Coppola and George Hickenlooper, captures the ordeal behind the scenes. Eleanor not only filmed, but also recorded private conversations with Francis and the actors. Thanks to her, we know the true extent of the emotional collapse the crew endured. She also published a personal diary of the shoot, one of the most honest and raw accounts of what it means to make a movie under extreme conditions. In the end, the production cost more than twice its original budget, but left an indelible mark on film history. Coppola would never again reach a success of that scale. Still, his ambition, determination, and madness delivered a masterpiece. As he later admitted, we had too many people, too much money, too much equipment, and little by little, we went insane. Today, the film remains just as powerful. Its influence runs through filmmakers of every generation. It is more than a movie. It's a sensory experience, a journey into the heart of darkness, both in the fiction on screen and in the reality of its creation.